Okay, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about area of triangles. Some things we want to consider before we work with are 1/2 base times height formula, or our what we could also use base times height formula over 2. Our formulas for area of a triangle. First, we want to take a look at this height and base. So let's just look at a certain couple different triangles here. One with a base and one with a height. Now, what makes it a height and base? This height is something that's drawn from a vertex, perpendicular to a base. So there's basically 3 things you need to look for that height. It needs to be connected to the vertex. It needs to be perpendicular to the base. We show that with the right angle. And so perpendicular, vertex, base. So for instance, if I had a triangle and one of the lines, I'm not doing so great with triangles today. One of the lines was over here. It's perpendicular to the base, but there isn't any, let's say, no vertex here. That we cannot consider as a base. Or maybe I have a line drawn from the vertex but not perpendicular to the base. We can't use that as a height either. You will have some triangles that look like this, where there isn't any way for me to draw a line from the vertex to the base. So what I would have to do is I would actually have to draw a height outside of that triangle and extend the base to be perpendicular to that. And in this case, I would use that as a height. And you also have some triangles which, let me draw a good triangle here for once. There you go, much better. Where actually one of the sides of the triangle, if you look at this triangle here, this side is connected to the vertex and perpendicular to the base. So actually this side of the triangle could also be used as the height of the triangle. Now, generally we look at the bottom piece as our base of the triangle. And the base needs to be connected to the height. But I could, like, each triangle has many heights and bases. So I could draw a line perpendicular to this and say that this is the base and this is the height. So there's many ways to look at it. Now let's look at a simple example. Here's some of my favorite crumple paper of a triangle here, and in which they give me a triangle with a height and a base. So let's say they tell me my base is 10 and my height is 5. And what I would do is basically use one of my 2 formulas. I could do 1/2 base times height, which is 10 times 5. A lot of times what I like to do, since multiplication is commutative, I like to do the base times the height first and then take half. So in half of 50 would be 25. Because what could happen is you could get a 1/2 7 times 6. And finding half of 7 is 3.5. But if I do half of 7 times 6, 42, well, that's a little bit easier to find half, and I can use and find 21 here. So a lot of times I like to do my base, which is why our second equation, which I showed you on the previous page, is base times height over 2. So a lot of times you could see area as this, in which I would have 5 times 10, 50, 50 over 2, which is 25. And again, you may have to, in some cases, for instance, let's say they gave you the sides of all sides of this triangle. Let's say they said this was 6, and they gave you this line here, and they told you this was, let's call this 3. You would have to do some work identifying what your base is. So again, this would be your base because, and this would be your height because it is the only line that's connected to the vertex perpendicular to the base, even though it's not touching the base. So your 3 here, that would be your height. And just to solve for this, we would do, 1/2, 3 times 4, half of 12, 6. Now, a question I like in which they give a lot of times is they'll actually give you a triangle. Let's look at one where one of the sides is the height. So remember, this line is connected from the vertex to the base, so it could be used as a height. But let's say they tell me my area is 25 and my base here is 10. And they're asking, so area is 25, base is 10, and they're asking what is the height? Well, one thing you want to do is just basically fill out your area formula and say, okay, my area is 25. They give me a base of 10, and I don't know my height, so I'll give a variable of h there. And basically all I want to do is solve for my h by multiplying both sides by 2. 50 is equal to, we could say 10 times h divided by 10. And my height here would be 50 divided by 10, 5. So that's a good question. You'll see a lot, standardized testing, maybe an SAT type question where they give you an area and solve for you want to solve for the height. And notice on the previous page, we talked about a triangle with 5 and 10 as the height and base. And you may also be asked, okay, if this is my height and my height is 3 and my area is 6 and my height is 3, what is my base? Well, on the previous page, we knew our base was 4, so how do we get that? Well, 1/2 times 3 times what number? Let's call it x is equal to 6. So multiply both sides by 2. 3x is equal to 12 divided by 3. X is equal to 4. And that's just like the triangle that we looked at on the previous page. So remember, a lot of, solving or working with triangles and areas, identifying that should be an I there, so identifying the base and height, and then using either one of your, or in this case we used a 1/2 base times height, either one of your 2 area formulas. I hope this helps. Remember, hard work and practice will make this easy.